In this video, I share how you can use a few Notion properties to nail down your priorities. We'll create 3 different Notion properties to create a priority output. We can then use this automated output across different database views, charts, and database templates. Having an automated way of organizing tasks by priority via status, date, and priority can be a huge lift for your Notion databases and ultimately your workflow. Again, because I want this video to be accessible to anyone, I'll be walking through a step-by-step process on how we can do this through a single Notion formula property. We'll be primarily relying on the let's formula function to account for the different circumstances that might arise from these 3 properties. As you can see, I've created a gridded table to show priorities and status. Generally speaking, when we have a deadline, we want to think before a deadline or after a deadline. In our priority formula, we'll be focusing on all the tasks that might not be started, indicated by priority. Because we don't really need to pay attention to tasks that are marked done, for example, I'll be primarily focusing on tasks that aren't started and considering whether a deadline is past due or it's in the future. And I'll show a very simple example using the status property, but in today's example, I'll be demonstrating how you can manipulate all 3 properties so that you can kind of suit it to your needs and how you'd like to organize your statuses and priorities. I use P0 as our number 1 priority status and work all the way up to P5, which will be the 6th priority based on some set conditions. Everyone's priorities work differently, so feel free to customize your formula outputs to best fit your context and your priorities. And this would be one of my more advanced videos, but the hope is that you'll be able to learn how you can shape your current properties to sort out your priorities and automate the way you want to visualize it in Notion. So to get started, all you need are 2 basic databases. Tasks and projects are the example that I usually gravitate towards, and I'll be connecting task databases to project databases for this example. All we need are 4 properties, and then we can basically rely on the other features of Notion to create a chart, create a database template, and then create some sort of task dashboard that we can insert within the project database template. We'll use the select property to signify the different priority types, and then a date for a deadline, and then a default status property as the 3rd property that we'll be accounting for in our task priority formula. And again, I'm entirely focused on tasks that are not started for example purposes and to sort of share the logic behind how this all works. So I'll create a formula property within the task database, and then we can start with the let's formula function. We can open it up, click Shift Enter twice, and then close it out with parentheses, and then we need to define a few variables to begin with. Since we'll be relying on different priority statuses and date at first, let's create those conditions for when something is selected or filled out. So with deadline, we can have an upcoming deadline, which we can name upcoming, separate it via a comma, and then we also want to think about how this date is in relation to the current state. We can define the date property to now, which is present moment, to differentiate between an upcoming deadline and a past deadline. So if deadline is after now, for example, that means that the deadline date is upcoming. And so we can close that out and create another variable for past due. I'm just naming it this way so that it's easier for the viewers to understand what's going on here. And we want to reverse that condition where deadline is before now. And so those are 2 conditions that we want to think about to begin with when it comes to priorities. Let's just define it so that we get rid of that let's error. And now, as you can see, if we define the variable and then mention it at the very end of a let's formula, it'll show what you've defined it as. In our case, a box appears because the output becomes a true or false condition. And so if it's false, it'll show an empty box. And if it's true, it'll show a checkbox. So if I show an upcoming deadline, tomorrow for example, notice how that checkbox changes to checked. And so that's a very easy way to create that condition. And we're going to build on this further with the status property and then the priority as well. Since we're focusing on tasks that are not started, let's just call this not started, and these are going to be where the status task is equal to double equal sign not started. And we want to make sure it's case sensitive, close that out, and if we replace the upcoming variable to not started, this checkbox says that it is not started. If we change this in progress, notice how that changes, right? So these are some very easy ways to think about conditions that might apply to your priority list to sort of automate this process of depending upon 3 different properties to sort and structure your priorities. This is the third condition that we're thinking about, the status property. And next we want to think about the priority level in which there is low, medium, and high. Since there are 3 different statuses and it's not necessarily a binary output, we're just going to title this priority, and we can create an ifs function to sort of change the weight or importance of a priority. And so if you haven't guessed already, these conditions are going to be ways in which we can turn it into a number and then add it up and then have the number be sorted in a manner in which it decides the priority of your tasks. And so to sort of illustrate how that starts to look like, I'll just start with the basic if statement and say if priority level is equal to low, then do this. If not, we'll do this. And we'll just close it out to illustrate the toNumber aspect of and how we're going to start to add up these different conditions to add up the priority levels and then to sort of output different priority statuses based on what we have. For example, if I do toNumber, open that up, close it out for not started, notice how it says 1. And so if you've checked out one of my very first videos, we use the toNumber formula function to create a scorecard or add up different categorical variables with this function so that we can convert a checkbox into a number. We, for example, add toNumber and then upcoming, for example, as that other condition we created, we have the output of 2, which says this task has an upcoming deadline and the status is not started. And so if you add both those conditions up, we get 2, and we're going to use these conditions as in a weighted format to align all 3 of these properties in a way to determine the priority of your tasks and to sort it out in that fashion. I'm going to remove those toNumber formulas for now and then get back to this priority level conditional statement. We're going to weight the 3 different priority levels that we've created, low, medium, and high. I can imagine when the priority level is low, we can maybe make that a 1 output, and then if priority is medium, for example, let's make output 2, add a comma. Again, with an ifs formula, we can add as many conditions and outputs as we want, and that simple S makes all the difference. And so I was able to easily add all the conditions for medium and then create that output here. So we can do the exact thing. Start typing out priority, select the priority level, equals, and we want to make that capital H high, close that comma out, and make that a 3. That's the most important or highest priority number that we can assign within this ifs statement. Notice how we add priority at the end of this. It just says true. That's not very helpful, so we're going to go back and add that toNumber formula function. And now we have an output that's numeric because we've converted this true or false checkbox output into a number. So if we go here and add a priority level, we see that it goes up to 2. If we add medium, it goes up another level, and high, it goes up another level at 4. So as you can imagine, it's relatively simple. It's just how you start to manipulate these different variables that we've defined within the let's formula function, and then piecing it together in a way to create that priority hierarchy that fits your context and your current properties. Now that we have all 4 conditions created, let's create an output to start to measure and weight the priority levels of these tasks. So we can add up not started, we can add up upcoming, and then we can also just copy paste and rename that variable to past due. So now we have a way to add up all of those conditions up and start summing those up. Again, I'm just going through the motions on how you might think about this. So to verify kind of the hierarchy of these priority levels, let's add some dummy tasks and see how that works. So far the hierarchy of the numbers makes sense. Now what ends up happening is when we have a date that is after today and then before today, we have the same numerical output of 4. Now, as you can imagine, that's not what we want because obviously when something is due in the past and it's still not started, that's going to take precedent over something that's due in the future. I can also show you how this works here. If I change the due date to the 24th, notice how it's still 5. And so theoretically, from a numerical standpoint, an upcoming deadline and a past deadline have the same weighted factor based on this simple output that we've created here. As you can imagine, that's not going to be the case. And so an easy way to go about changing that up is by weighting these numerical properties through some multiplication. As you can imagine, something that's past due is probably twice as important, or should be weighted twice as much as something that's upcoming. And so we can multiply that by a factor of 2 within this output. So now we have that differentiation between if a deadline is past due or if it's upcoming. And so if you think about the priorities and the hierarchy of these numbers, you can see that when the priority level is high and the deadline is past due and this task is not started, it's going to be represented as a 6, which is the highest number that we can output via this current let's formula function. Again, we're going to be building on this further. So if you just skip to this portion of the video, I highly recommend the next 5 to 10 minutes clips, as that's going to be how we start to shape our priority outputs. I think immediately off the bat, notice how 5 appears twice here, even when the priority level is different, and even when the deadline is in the past as well, right? And so creating the formula seems pretty straightforward at first, but when you start to dig into the conditions, right, notice how a high priority item is equally as high as a medium priority item in the past. And so if we want to differentiate these conditions further, we need to think of ways in which create this separation, kind of weight the differences of priority and due date. I think a really handy way to verify that your formula works is to create 2 tasks with each priority level and a deadline in the past and a deadline in the future, so that when you're working with your formula to start like this, you have a way to verify that hierarchy and you can separate the priority levels based on the conditions you've created yourself. We've created all the possible combinations that we can have with the deadline and then the priority level. And notice how we have some overlapping numbers across these conditions that we've currently laid out. And so, again, the goal of this video is to create some more separation between hierarchy and priority. And so, in our case, I think if a medium priority task is past due, it should become weighted higher or become more important than a high priority task that is due in the future. And so, I'm going to try to create an order in which I want to prioritize my tasks. The highest priority is a high priority task that is past due. The next one is a medium priority level task that is past due. And then the third and most important would be a high priority task that is due in the future. And then obviously probably what we want next is a medium level priority task that is due in the future, which comes after this one. So this hierarchy works nicely, but this doesn't necessarily work very well because we're saying both of these should be weighted equal. In your case, maybe that's good enough, but we're going to go a step further in this video. And as you can imagine here, with a low priority task that is past the due date is weighted the same as a medium priority task that is due in the future. Maybe this is okay for you, but I'm going to weight this medium priority task due in the future higher than a low priority task due in the past. And so now I have sort of an order in which I want to create these priorities. And so I want to make this P0, I want to make this P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5, like I said and mentioned in the video. That was a rather long explanation to get to where we're trying to go, but hopefully that was helpful in trying to retrofit this example with your current situation. At the end of the day, we want to create status outputs and not numbers. And so what we can easily do here is change this output into a variable and then create a conditional statement that says if it is this number, then do this. If it's this number, do that, right? Let's just title this P score as a priority score, add a comma, close that out with another comma, and then let's just add a temporary output and title it cool. I think in this portion of the video, we're going to be creating a helper formula so that we can kind of use this variable that we've created and have that as a way to verify that our priority statuses are working and that we can sequentially order these priorities in the way that we talked about. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to remove cool and then title this P score. So we see those numerical outputs based on the current formula. And in this way, we just title this number. Whenever we want to verify that our formula hierarchy works, we just adjust this formula or duplicate it and verify that that is configured properly. We want to say ifs P score equals 6, let's output P0. I'm going to close that conditional statement for now and then show you what I mean. We have P0 equals 6, right? In this case, that works great, but as we've seen, we need to account for these duplicate numbers that appear within this. Similarly to the way that we sort of created this weighted factor and multiplier of 2 with the past due, to further separate these numbers out, we can do something very similar. And so to create some more separation between these priority levels and the combination of these three different properties, we can also multiply priority by 2. And so we've done that for formula here. And now we should do the same with number 2. See how that multiplier works, right? The reason why we have these two different formulas is so that we can test our outputs and then also verify numerically through this. And notice how we see more hierarchy and more separation between these numerical outputs that we see through that multiplier. And that multiplier is very important, and this is very similar to a weighted method in which we want to assign score, calculate anything in a more strategic fashion, as opposed to just taking the number for face value. Now that we see this separation, we can start to create those different statuses so that when the score is a certain number, let's output P5. And as we can see, 9 is the highest priority item. And so if we go back in this formula, we can go down to 6, turn that 6 upside down to a 9, and now we have that P0 as our starting point for this priority formula. As you can imagine, we just go down this list, do Shift Enter, move my cursor to the top, tab over, add a space, P score equals 8, that is P1. So now we have that hierarchy started, and if we just save it, we see P1 as our other output based on the score that we've calculated. Now, in our case, because I still want to make a medium priority level task that's past due more important than a high priority task that is due in the future, this is where I want to switch up those numerical statuses to ensure that 7 is actually P1 value and 8 is actually our P2 value. If you left the numbering exclusively to the ordering of the numbers, you couldn't justify those priority levels. But because now that we're custom coding these conditional outputs specific to a number or weighted output that we are directly separating by these three properties, we can customize our priority output in this exact way, right? So if you only have 3 priorities, you'd be done here. But in this video, we're just going to do 6 levels for tutorial's sake. I'm just copying and pasting, tabbing and then spacing, and then changing the output to P4 and then P5. Shift Enter is very helpful to add a new line break, and you don't have to move your cursor necessarily, and you can just rely on your keyboard to go to the next priority. So we have 6 priority statuses, like we initially mentioned, P0 through P5. And now, when we compare this numerical hierarchy that we've created, and then compared to the status, we can see that we've configured all these conditions correctly based on the ordering of this output. This is how you can start your basic priority level through these weighted conditions that I introduced. This is sort of a compilation, a few of my videos that I've created in the past. Now, let's say one of these properties is marked empty. And so let's test that out. Date is tomorrow, nothing happens. Date's in the past, nothing happens. And then if it's low, we see this. 4, it's medium, we see that. And so when we want to order these properties, we can go to sort, priority, default to ascending, and we see those priorities line up nicely for the output. Now, notice how if any of these properties are empty, we don't have an output. So something we can do to go the extra mile is say, Shift Enter there, and add the condition of if the deadline, for example, is empty, we can show output, close that out, this deadline, we have add deadline as a output for the priority status. So this is an extra condition that you can add, and because that's the first condition that we've created, it will check for that first before it starts to check for the score comparison to output a priority status. Now, let's say we had an empty priority. We can add priority, close that out, and it works the same. So if I remove priority here, because deadline is the first condition that we're mentioning, and because it is empty, it's going to say add deadline. But notice how if I add a deadline, it moves to the next condition of add priority. And so when we add priority, it's going to add it up, and boom, it gets sorted out in this list. Now, if we wanted to avoid those other statuses that include add deadline or add priority, we can do priority starts with a P, and then isolate those events. And so if I add a new thing, add deadline immediately gets showed for any new task entry, but notice how it doesn't appear in this view. Remove that filter, it appears here. That's a convenient way to sort of create that filtered method and some basic statuses to sort of help organize your tasks numerically and automate that priority process. I think the other cool thing that you can do is you can create a chart. Yeah, maybe a pie chart of those priority levels that we might have. So low, medium, and high are helpful, but if we show the priority formula we've created, we can kind of create that hierarchy of what's P0 all the way to P5, sort by priority A to Z. And then let's also create that filter I mentioned, where priority starts with P. So we can remove those add deadline and add priority formula status outputs, and then we don't want to show the values, we want to show the count of how many of those exist. I'm going to add project filter so that we can use this for our database template, and we can visualize this with any projects and its related tasks in terms of a priority status. So if we scroll down, again, because we don't need any other properties except for the relation to do what we're doing here. We're going to add a new template, make that bigger, make it full width. Maybe we'll add 2 charts for starters, so we'll have 2 columns. Then while we're here, let's copy this chart view that we created earlier and then paste it in that new column space. Let's hide that view, a space name, and then I also want to filter to make sure that related tasks are related to this current project database template. When it says no data, that's correct because this is the database template that I'm referencing. And maybe we want sort of a similar view to this chart, but for completed tasks. We can duplicate that chart. Because we're accounting for tasks that are not started, let's create a chart for all tasks that are complete within a chart. And then we can create this view here and then move it to the project database template to create that view. So we'll add another chart through duplication where we want to show status by group, and we want to show the status descending. Maybe we can tell that complete. We'll copy this linked view into this section, paste it in there, add that filter that we did with the other pie chart. So now if we go back to task priorities, for example, go back to our table, let's relate all of these tasks to a new project. Bold select projects, and then now we have all these new pages that are linked to this new project. These are going to be tasks. And so when we make this bigger and click on this template that we just worked on, we can see all the priority level tasks that are related to this project, and then how many are in the complete and to-do sections. Something I forgot to filter out is in this view, we want to make sure that the status is in to-do or in progress so that we don't account for those priority statuses of tasks that we want to put on the project database template, and so we can use it more appropriately. The page, I'm going to go to this done. Notice how that shrank, and notice how we have 1 task out of 8 that is marked as complete. If we don't want to show the center value, we just go to more style options and then show value in center. And we can just untoggle that as well. We can also change the data labels, maybe to name value if we want, and then to sort of reset that database template, we just Control A, delete, and then add it back to see our new changes applied to our current projects. And so this is just one way in which we can kind of start to utilize charts and database templates to sort of complement this task priority formula that we've been working on. Again, this is just one way to organize priorities, but I hope this gave you a good sense on how we can weight different conditions like we did here, weighting tasks that are past due twice as much as tasks that have an upcoming deadline, and then stagnating the priority levels based on different statuses, and then also adding weighted factor to create that stagnation and create that numerical separation to assign those priority statuses unique to the conditions that we just set up. I only added the not started status condition for beginners' sake, but hopefully by the end of this video, you can take it up another notch by listing out specific conditions beyond the default statuses that I've outlined at the beginning of the video. I think this was a rather longer video, and it's been a while since I've created something. Apologies for video, audio, and script quality compared to my more prominent videos on this channel. Thanks for watching if you made it this far, and I'll see you in a few weeks. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.